Welcome to Nature Revisited, a podcast that explores our relationship with the natural world. It consists of interviews, stories, and discussions that highlight the notion that nature is not a place one goes to, but rather a place one is already a part of, that we are nature. For those of you who are new to the podcast, my name is Stefan Van Noorden. On this episode, Nature Revisited is honored to welcome Jason Allen-Paisant to the podcast, talking about his new book, The Possibility of Tenderness. Jason is a Jamaican poet, scholar, and writer whose debut collection of poetry, Thinking with Trees, won him the 2022 OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Poetry. His second collection of poetry, Self-Portrait as Othello, won the 2023 T.S. Eliot Prize. The Possibility of Tenderness, a Jamaican memoir of plants and dreams, is the story of Jason's return to Jamaica and what that journey revealed. The Possibility of Tenderness is a deeply personal and poetic search for peace and belonging, deeply rooted in the soil. Part memoir, part artist novel, The Possibility of Tenderness challenges us to reimagine what it means to thrive in a fractured world. Jason joins me from his home in Leeds, England, to talk about his journey back to Jamaica and the possibility of tenderness. So Jason, welcome to Nature Revisited. It's a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Absolute pleasure being with you, Stefan.
I love the title of your new book, The Possibility of Tenderness, a Jamaican memoir of plants and dreams. I have been looking forward to this conversation and the perspective that you bring. So let's start in Jamaica. You were raised in Jamaica in Coffee Grove by your grandmother, Mama. Who was Mama and what was her impact on your story?
She was a retired school teacher. She was a postmistress. What I also knew her as was a woman who worked the small cultivation plots, which we call grung. She also was very interested in plants. I don't know if she would call herself a herbalist. So Mama was a woman who was close to the earth, close to the soil, to the grung, as we say. She was my grandmother, as you mentioned, and she was the woman who raised me. So although she was my grandmother, she was the first mother I knew. The book speaks about the connotation around tenderness has something to do with the inseparability of the world of plants and the joy of being with plants, which is characteristic of the world that I grew up in. She was also, and this is the third element that comes to me, a church woman. She was deeply committed to her church. It was called the Church of God. That church was a kind of center of focus for the community. It was the social place in the rural hillside community. And so the church provided a kind of compass spiritually and emotionally and socially to that community. And Mama was big in that. She attracted a lot of people to her by being educated to the level that she was, which was a grade 9 education. But that was a lot in those days and in that sort of community. That's a portrait of Mama in a nutshell.
So, what is a grunge? And how would you describe Mama's relationship with the land?
It's not grunge, but grung, Grung, which I think comes from the English word ground. Guess that with the African accent, let's just say, of the Jamaicans. There's something happening there linguistically that renders it as grung. But grung for us is, yes, it is ground, but it is more than just lifeless, inanimate terrain that you walk on. It has a idea of aliveness. There is an aliveness associated with the earth in our culture. I must say that growing is, first of all, the place where you grow your food. Because this word emerges amongst food-growing people, we use the word peasant, which I've been told in the United States is a derogatory term, but for us it's absolutely not. It's just small-scale farmers. Because it emerges among the folk people, it has that sense of spirituality, of a spiritual connection between the human being and the ancestors and the world. Most of our people trace their ancestry back to Africa. That's a big part of who we are. We are descendants of Africans brought to the West Indies, including Jamaica, as slaves. The grung maintains that connection to the cyclical idea of what it means to be alive with the soil, living with the earth. So when we say grung, we mean small cultivation plots. We mean the earth in its aliveness and a community of relations between us as humans and the more than human world.
So how strongly does food connect people to the land in Jamaican culture?
Very strongly, because it was the growing of food in the era of slavery. The growing of food was one of the rare things that would enable the maintenance of a cultural connection to the homeland, which is to Africa and the various locales that these people would have come from. There are anecdotes and histories and tales of people who carried rice grain in their hair as they were transported into the slave ship. Knowing the darkness and the unknowns that they were going to, they wanted to maintain something of themselves. And interestingly, food seems to be one of those things that you carry. Food seems to define us in unusual and surprising ways. I think a part of that is the idea of being able to plant something. The gesture of setting something in the earth and seeing it grow brings some profound sense of connection and connectedness to us. There's also the yams, which made their way to Jamaica from West Africa. And in Jamaica, I'm told there are 21 varieties of them. Yam is in certain West African cultures, including the Akan culture, is an everyday thing. You can't get more everyday and commonplace than that. It is the staple. But at the same time, it is sacred. Remind the people that they are bound to the earth. This is where they're from. And they're connected into a cycle that includes the living, the dead, and the unborn. That's more than human. That's human, but also more than human. So the significance of food it's profound in that respect. It being something that keeps us connected and whereby we can affirm a sense of belonging and a sense of community, which is another big word, as you know, from my work.
In the book, you returned to Jamaica in 2022. What was it that enticed you to leave Coffee Grove, and what brought you back?
You use the word entice, and that's an interesting choice of words. I would say I left Coffee Grove in some ways as a matter of course. My grandmother raised me for my earliest years. The reason behind that was that my biological mother, wasn't prepared to receive me because she had me while she was still a student training to become a teacher. I tell that story as context to the leaving, which was the idea of upward social mobility. And that begins with my mother, who was the first of our family to go to a traditional high school. That was her ticket out of the grung, out of rural Jamaica. This is how it was imagined. While I've mentioned those ancient ancestral forces that connect us to the earth, that have us honor the earth, there are also the forces of, let's just say, modernity. I use that term guardedly. And narratives of progress. And my mother sent for me and began to live with her. That was the narrative that I fell into. In other words, this is what we were about, leaving the earth behind, because that was a token, if you will, of our history, which was not an easy history of slavery. To say it quite bluntly, the connection with the grung and with the earth and with the land was often envisaged as a connection with slavery. It was a connection with the negative aspects of our past. I hasten to say that today, a lot of the younger generation are reimagining that narrative and transforming and flipping that narrative. But very much, for a long time, that was what it was. So when I fell into this upward social mobility, I was emulating her. She had made her way to high school and she had not made it all the way to university, but I became the one to take that journey to its next phase, which is to go on to university, as I did a first degree, did a master's, did a doctorate. It was a journey of perfection, of self-making. To be quite frank, any kind of interest in planting things, in growing things, in having hands in the earth, in the soil, we needed to move away from that. It's that journey of self-making and self-fashioning, which I talk about in the book. Along the apex or advanced stage of that journey, to stop, look around, look at myself, and to, for the first time, question that journey, ask questions of that journey, interrogate the narrative that I've been telling about myself. In a way, that is the genesis of the book, to think about alienation from ground, from soil, from earth, as being a central part of your narrative, your personal story about yourself.
So what are some of the monuments you found in your search for the story of your history that were deeply planted in the land?
I love this question because there are no monuments in Coffee Grove, and not in the traditional sense of monuments. I began to think that perhaps the ordinary things in our lives that ground us, that give us a sense of belonging to the land, that give us a sense of a claim to the land, could be monuments, even if not in a traditional, glorious sense. And I can think of a couple. The first being the house, Mama's house that I describe. I think of it as a monument because I think of the story that it represents, which is one of resilience and one of beauty, despite the stigmas, I want to say, attached to our environment and our history. That to me stood out as a monument. What do you do with monuments? You want to examine them. You want to put them under the light. You want to elevate them, which is what I attempt to do in my prose, what I seek to do in my poetry. The second one I think about is the post office, which I write about in some detail there. The post office, which my grandmother was the mistress of when I was a child, which she brought me to daily. A sort of identifier, it's a marker, it's loaded with memory, it's loaded with a sense of place and a sense of the journey. While it's the place that I used to go to as a child, it seemed to rise in significance as I look back on the journey and assess the long journey that I have taken from that hillside community. I see that as a monument to our survival, to our resilience, and to the sense of dignity that we had about ourselves. A monument also to the earth. Look at that as a monument as well.
What are some of the many different meanings of possession of land and soil in the culture of Coffee Grove in Jamaica?
There is food independence, food sovereignty. That's one major meaning of possessing the soil. Coffee Grove is what it is. I describe it in the book as a rare example and a true one that I can think of. A true one of food sovereignty. Not only that, but of a sovereign food community, an agricultural network of people who grow things, who rear cattle, and who trade among themselves. But I grew up seeing food independence as something normal. And because it was normal, it's not something that we thought about. This was how we were. What you didn't grow, you would get it from somebody who grew that, but you would trade with them. Or sometimes it was selling. It wasn't always bartering or gifting. So it was an economy, a localized economy. That's something I realize that a lot of people on this planet, particularly in the West, have never seen. They have never seen an example of that. So the first major meaning is the sovereignty of being able to live from your own food, to live as a community around that. But also the second meaning, I would say, is the joy of the tenure of the land. A sense in which the land belongs to them, but they also belong to the land. It's a responsibility. The word stewardship comes to mind because it's what they have. They don't have a lot of money, but they have the wealth and the riches of a piece of earth that they can steward for themselves, that they can call their own. And that brings a lot of pride. The third point, generationally land is significant. And we have a profound sense of that in our culture, this ability to pass on something to your children. And it's important that the land remain in the family. In that context, I'm not saying that development culture hasn't overtaken Jamaica like everywhere else, but I'm saying that there still is that urge and that treasured sense of what it is to own land and to have land as a sort of commonwealth, a sort of generational wealth. And that is very present.
So you say in the book, memory is most intense when it becomes physical. What are some of the moments of your visit back to Jamaica that rendered the past present?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. Memory becoming physical. One instance I can remember was taking the path that led to the post office. I was telling you about the post office just now. It's a site on the map of my childhood. And I had not taken that route in perhaps 30 years. It felt like a lifetime ago. And I asked myself, would I remember the path? I found the path and I started walking. It wasn't a path that I remember because it was all overgrown with bushes. As I went through that, placing one foot after the other on these rocks, it felt as if the place also knew me. It felt like a meeting of kin. For the first time, I suppose, I asked myself whether is it just us who know a place when we know it intimately? Does the place also know us? Genuinely, that was the sensation that I felt in that moment. Something connecting again. And that was the typicality of it. It's that, like, my body profoundly knows this place and it profoundly belongs to this place. And it profoundly, something of me has fused with this place. Despite my not coming here for 30 odd years. I also visited a house, which I do not write about in the book. I visited the house, abandoned now, long abandoned, of my neighbor back then, where we used to hang out as a child. She had a lot of grandchildren. We used to play together. A house is always something special. Even when it has fallen into ruin, there is something magical and quite frankly haunting about a house. The vividness of what that place was to me, to be able to look at the door, to be able to look at this construction, it has all the sensory vividness of our lives there, of the way we used to play, that comes back.
So why did you choose The Possibility of Tenderness for the title of the book?
In this book, I frame tenderness as an alternative to lives imagined solely through struggle. Because this book is about placing the grung, this kind of environment, into literature in ways that I haven't seen it quite done before. I believe that that narrative, when rooted in the small and the felt, as I've been saying all along, becomes a way to imagine freedom differently, not as conquest or dominant, but as a possibility of feeling safe, actually, of being held, of no longer being at war. It feel like such a reality for us, for myself and for us as Black people. It felt important, almost like finding a way out of the narrative of our bodies at war. The idea of the possibility of tenderness, it's talking about reimagining the earth, the soil, the grung, which is my word here, the word that I use, our word, for the earth and the soil, and a certain form of liberation through these stories grounded in intimacy, in the active experience of being with the land.
You talk about standing on the veranda of the great house. How did that reveal to you the real contrast between rich and poor, Black and white, and how your experience with racism is connected to the land, to the soil, and to plants?
The experience of standing on the veranda of that great house in Jamaica is a visceral embodiment that allows you to get you to see and sense what is at play in that split between those who have the pleasure of leisure and of looking and gazing, and those whose lives are defined by toil. But in addition to that, my contention is that, and I don't think I have to contend much because I think it's quite self-evident, the aesthetics of the great house is all about forgetting, not cognizant of the aesthetics of the ground. It's a kind of distant thing because you have to separate away and hide away all the horrors that is making your position possible. All the violence that is affording you that comfort in which you stand and look out and have leisure. In distinction to that, the aesthetics of the grung is what I talk about in the book, which is one of care, stewardship, and reciprocity. It's one in which people need to be fundamentally connected to the work that they do, connected to the soil. It is hard work very often. You can never romanticize farming. You can never romanticize hands in the soil. But what I do say is that the toil and the labor that comes with the soil is not without creativity, and it's also not without joy. So the answer is that standing on the great house's veranda enables me to parse the differences in those aesthetics, particularly in the one whose beauty hides the violence beneath the beauty.
Your book straddles two cultures that you have lived in, two very different cultures that are connected, the cultures of Jamaica and the UK have both shaped your relationship with the land. Have you been able to answer the question that you ask in your book? And I quote, "As a foreigner, can I forge a bond with the soil of England?"
As a foreigner, can I forge a bond with the soil in England? I think the answer to that is yes. I suppose the issue is around what sort of bond, and that's the question that I'm trying to answer. We, my wife and I, have recently bought a house, and it has a garden. And I do not want to front load the issue of whether it's going to be a stronger bond or a lesser bond. Hard to imagine it being a stronger bond, I must say. So I guess the answer is also, let's wait and see. As I say in the very first chapter of the book, that the earth of Coffee Grove has certainly shaped me. I realize that it has shaped the artist that I am, because I'm an artist whose work is very often linked to the land. There's a kind of sensibility in the attention that I pay to earth, to land, to soil. That comes from my childhood. Now, the other part of the question is whether the land in the UK has shaped me. Well, that's the trickier one. For a long time, I didn't have access to it or access to space to grow my own food. As I said, all that is slowly changing. A little bit. I think the least that one can say that has shaped some of the questions that I'm asking.
So at the end of your journey, how did the place, the people, the history of Coffee Grove transform the way you see and imagine?
At the end of the journey, I started thinking of plants as more than things that you inject. There was some kind of way in which the plants get through your pores. But when you're intentional about those plants, intentional about attuning your mind to them without any kind of foregone conclusion as to what might happen, but with an openness as to how they might shift your sense of yourself in the world. Something has happened to me there, because I think of plants as communicative now in a way I didn't before I started this journey. I think of plants as something that can communicate. Like I feel that they communicate through their energies, that they speak and feel and reach out to me in vibrations and energies that I have to learn to be receptive to see the plant world as alive in that very distinct and powerful sense, that it's waiting for me to engage with it. A place for what remains without play, the intimate histories of minor characters, intimacies in the ground. Ground, the sanctuary where the departed continue to touch upon our senses.
I hope you enjoyed this episode with Jason Allen-Paisant, and that you get the opportunity to discover his poetry and his latest book, The Possibility of Tenderness. And do visit his website, jasonallenpaisant.com, to learn more about this gifted writer. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with friends, family, and colleagues. And please rate us on your favorite podcast server. It will help us to reach a larger audience. You can follow Nature Revisited on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or our website, nordenproductions.com. I would also like to invite you to share your comments and ideas and even suggestions for future guests for Nature Revisited on the comment section of this episode on our website. The music for Nature Revisited is Tim Buckley, Buzz and Fly. The Nature Revisited team consists of Stefan Van Orden, Charles Gagan, and Scott Chasky. And I hope you will join me for the next edition of Nature Revisited. And in the meantime, remember, we are nature.